Hello, everyone. I'm your guest host, Antonio Mobley, and welcome to Tabernacle Talks. Tabernacle Talks is a new urban show that discusses a variety of topics. Tonight's topic is, do all lives matter? Yeah, I'm good. No, I'm good. Hello, everyone. I'm your host, Antonio Mobley, and welcome to Tabernacle Talks. Tabernacle Talks is a new urban show that discusses a variety of topics. Tonight's topic being, do all lives matter? But before we go into the topic, I want to introduce five of our local residents in the Dayton area.
Hi, I'm Dr. Michelle Pierce Mobley.
I'm Guy Jones.
Hello, I'm Bob Troxel.
I'm Keith Lander.
And I'm Theresa Barksdale.
All right, now before we get into the conversation, if you're watching at home, please like, comment, and share to please help grow the Tabernacle Talks brand. Now, as the moderator, I want all the comments to be direct and do not just be direct to the moderator. So to dive into the first question, what do you think about the recent deterioration of the racial climate in the U.S.?
Wants to take that one?
I'll go first. Well, when you say deterioration of a racial climate, I don't think it really deteriorated. I just think it was being exposed. With the invention of all these cell phones, people are taking video, and now the racism is being seen all over the world, and how people are being treated, especially African Americans, people who are non-white, are being treated, is being filmed, and it's being showcased now. And so when we speak of race relations and the decline of it, I go back to the time of every time an injustice happened or a murder happened, but unarmed black citizens, then the next conversation we have is about race relations. I was like, why don't we have a conversation about this murder that just took place and bringing justice to an unjust situation? And so if we focus in on the justice aspect of it and not allowing people to walk free from murdering innocent, unarmed black citizens and people of color, it almost reminds me of the days when Emmett Till was killed and what those white men did to him. They laughed in the courtroom, laughed out the courtroom. Nobody charged. And I can give you a whole list of people that's been killed by police, unarmed, minding their own business, like Breonna Taylor, and yet no charges. So we need to start having a conversation on the justice side of this thing.
I think there's been a comfort level that was established that it was probably okay to be racist as long as you didn't talk about it. I think race and color has always been an uncomfortable conversation for people. And I think now that the scabs have been removed, you're starting to see injustice unhinged. And I'm concerned now that people feel that because it's okay to say Black lives don't matter or to try to hijack that conversation and make it something else, that we've gone back 50 years. I think we're seeing Jim Crow type media coverage. I mean, I'm almost waiting for dogs and water to be sprayed. You're seeing images that you haven't seen since the early 60s. And so I do think that we have to pause a bit and find out why there's so much unrest and why it took really something that's been happening all the time to give people realization that there's a real problem in this country.
I think that our racial upset or what's going on with our country now is that we have a new mindset of young adults, children, students in school who have missed, or it has been skipped for them, real history. And it's coming to light. And what we, I know in my generation, may have seen or heard or read at different points in our lives and experienced, the young children and students, very smart, very alert. Technology has really been an advantage for them. And they are seeing what parents or grandparents may have shared with them. And there's a new mindset on how to handle it. So, and then to top it off is what our country is being run through and by at this point, and it's being addressed. It's open now. It's open.
Okay, well, to dive into the second question, did you think race relations would improve after Barack Obama was elected?
Well, I didn't, because as soon as President Obama was elected, that it spurred off this political organization called the Tea Party. And when you seen these rallies, and they had signs with pictures of President Obama with a bone through his nose and some hateful other rhetoric, and not only it's coming from citizens, but coming from elected officials, and they was spitting off this racist language and code words. And what happened when President Obama got elected, it tore into the psychology of some of these folks who believe, some white folks believe that they were superior, and that position of presidency was just to be a white only. But when President Obama was very articulate, very intelligent, very stateside, and brung this country from the ruins, instead of giving them the credit as due, they couldn't pull themselves to do it because the color of the man's skin, you know, and that's what it boils down to, you know. Now, it's only a small percentage of those white folks that act like that, you know. Overall, some other folks, we've seen all different kind of races, they were celebrating, you know. So I think I don't want to paint the picture of all white folks being racist and this kind of thing, because that's not true, because I don't want people to point the finger at me and say all black folks do all these stereotypes that they come up with. But the bottom line is, when President Obama got elected, that's when people went and started saying the most racist stuff you can ever hear. It was on the airwaves, on some of these conservative radio outlets, on TV, and they got away with it. I mean, even people in Congress who had positions to make laws, their racism started to come out, and they tried to block President Obama from achieving anything. But see, a preacher told me a long time ago, man's plan and God's plan will outweigh man's plan if man is doing it for the devilment. And so what we seen the success of President Obama, because, you know, he was doing the will of the people.
My only recollection of it was birth certificate gate. I don't think I ever remember in my lifetime a president having to present a birth certificate, or because he had a middle name Hussein, that it implied that he wasn't a natural citizen. And so I think he endured a lot of skepticism and had to prove things that I don't think any other president had to prove. They would say things like he's articulate, and I think you would have to assume a Harvard Law School scholar is articulate, but you would always see things characterizing him as articulate as though that was surprising or not expected. And so I don't think that the racial climate improved because of Barack Obama. I think, once again, people just felt, we'll give you one, and there's kind of this mindset, there's always a place for one, and I think he was the one.
I think for speaking for myself and others around me, my peers, during that time when Barack Obama became president, he brought about a sense of pride in us as minorities, and blacks, minorities, to set the tone that we can do it too. And he was a surprise for others around him, those he had to work with, but we were able to hold our heads up just a little bit higher with a little bit of knowing that it can be done. And things that people didn't think would happen, it happened in a lot of our lifetimes. So if he made a change, yes and no. But he did bring about opportunities for others to know that they too can do the same. So
I think his election raised people's expectations that there would be changes, and some I had read were disappointed that more changes, didn't follow. And so when you don't confirm or validate people's expectations, sometimes, there's some negative emotions that result from that. And I don't know whether that relates to anything that is happening today, but I think the expectations were heightened by his election.
Well, to go on to question 3, an Associated Press article mentioned that other minority groups have been excluded from the discussion on race, specifically citing the absence of Native Americans. Do you feel racial inequality is bigger than just black and white? And how can we get more voices at the table?
By listening. I mean, it's not like, like you take, for example, everybody's acting surprised that the Washington Redskins changed their name. Native people, we've been talking about that for decades. And, and it's like, and when he began to look at just some of the social issues and relating to Native people, that's always been an issue. It's always been out there. And Native people have always done it, as other organizations and other groups have done it as well. But the one thing is that America only listens to a black and white conversation, and it's nothing else. And I mean, it's like, you take, for example, the other day somebody made a remark, and they said that they were looking for, there's a university, the University of Dayton, it was looking for evidence of systemic racism in Dayton in regards to the Native community. And I'm like, really? I mean, where do you want to start? Let's look at the Dayton Art Institute. That was burial grounds that was destroyed to build that institution. They just came in and just cleared it out. Or even if we were to go back to, let's talk about Triangle Park, what they were going to do at Triangle Park. And, and they were acting like, the mayor came on TV and talked about she was blindsided. No. I had the reports. I had their reports, not mine. It was theirs. I needed a white person to validate what I had. And it was the news channel that asked me the question, and I said, I need you. He's like, you need me? And I'm like, yes, I need you to validate this for me. And that's where race relations, these relationships, that's the issue. I needed to have a white guy validate what I had, what I was saying. That's a problem. And even so, to recognize it as that, I need that. We need that. And that's all of the issues. When we look at all of these issues, they've always been there. But, one of the things is that, it's like you need white people to recognize it, and then you need black people to recognize it and validate it as it is racism. It's not racism because it's always been there. There's a segment of this society that their views are privileged. And they will continue with that dialogue. That's Triangle Park. Look at Gem City Market. Nobody talks about that. There's burials There's a burial mound. The burial mound was in that vicinity. I asked them if they had done an archaeological assessment, a historic assessment. You know, what was done? Nothing. Nothing was done. You know, River's Edge. You can drive down here on I-75 and you see the old Robert Shopping Center. That was a ceremonial grounds that was destroyed. Alex Bell Road. You got Bellbrook on one end and Alexanderville on the other end. But it was destroyed. There's a trailer park there now. And there used to be a shopping center. All of that was destroyed. And now they're talking about redeveloping it. Is there going to be any assessments done? Is there any recognition that this was ceremonial grounds? You know, what would you say if suddenly people came in here and just wiped out this church? Put in a shopping center? You know, who's going to be that voice? Who's going to be that voice for the people? And when the people speak up, who validates it as it being, you know, a problem? If when segments of this community and this society don't acknowledge it, then it just, you know, nobody's hearing it. Nobody wants to hear it. It's always been there. It's just people are choosing to listen. You know, you got Stebbins High School. Look at that mascot. What they did is they changed the narrative to justify what they are perpetuating. Wayne High School. Look at Wayne High School. Their logo. And the antics of the people, the fans. You know, is that racism? You're damn right it's racism. And I'm sorry to say that in the church here. But it is. But the narrative that is put out there justifies their actions. You know, you got all these fans at a Wayne High School basketball game, football game. Not one of them realized their actions and what they're doing. So it's always been there. It's just people are finally listening.
I think that what he's sharing is a part of a problem with our society that has brought about a lot of issues. Our history needs to be rewritten to a real point for not just our country, but every city, state, community, because there's real rich history among our new term that we use now, people of color. And those that are people of color need to be straightforward and outward with that history. Nobody else is going to volunteer that information if we don't bring it forth. And if we have the proof, which many do, it can become real. And this is what's starting to happen. We need real history for our children growing up now, real history for our young adults who are coming out there in the society to work and take on these important jobs, so that we can rearrange and let people hear. A lot of it is just flat out ignorance, and some is systemic as we know it, and it's going to continue if we don't make that change. So Black lives do matter. People of color do matter. And I think it's on its way. It's working. But it's a working process, and we can't stop. It has to continue to make it real for those coming up and continuing on with the torch.
Can I add one more point?
Go ahead.
And it's because when we talk about the narrative that is happening, even to the fact that we use terms like people of color, we should stay away from that. What we should be saying is non-white. And it's like, and even at that, there's even a segment of that community that doesn't get included. Because even they themselves, I mean, you know, one of the things is that, you know, look at East Dayton. You know, are they considered white? only when it comes time for election. Then they're white. But in any other time, oh, you ought to hear the terminology that's related to people in East Dayton. And, you know, and that's one of the things is that we have to be mindful. Yes, there needs to be a new narrative. And we have to be very careful about that narrative and what it is, because you see, if we're going to be telling our truth, you know, we need to be careful about that narrative that we are putting out there. So, you know, because we're not the problem. Racism isn't my problem. It's theirs. The ones who created it, it's their problem. Not mine, it's theirs. They're the ones who have the biggest issue with me. And, you know, and so that narrative, we have to be mindful about that narrative. And where does that narrative get perpetuated? That narrative gets perpetuated within our schools and our churches. We have to be mindful about that.
Okay, on to question number 4. President Donald Trump recently tweeted that Black Lives Matter was a symbol of hate. Do you agree with that statement?
I think he probably said that because they painted that in front of Trump Plaza. I think Donald Trump is very masterful in how he speaks to his base. I think the more audacious and the more ridiculous he is, the more he incentivizes the people who believe his rhetoric to follow him. And he's very insidious about how he does that. I remember watching a debate where he actually used college students to come up and say things that he would have never been able to get away with saying, but he clearly had to have seen their scripts and their speeches to see what they were going to say to be able to get the narrative out that Black Lives Matters are hate groups, or that all lives matter, or blue lives matter. So I think that he's very masterful in that regard and very dangerous in that regard, because people want to say, oh, it's an oops, or he's not intentional. He's very intentional about what he's doing and what he's saying.
Yeah, as far as Black Lives Matter, as President Trump said, a hate group. Black Lives Matter is a organization seeking to stop or either curtail systemic racism in various institutions. Black Lives Matter has never done what the Ku Klux Klan has done. They never hung white folk from a tree. Black Lives Matter ain't never threw a bomb through a church that killed 4 little girls in Alabama. Black Lives Matter ain't never went to a white folks' house and drug their child out of there and torture him and throw him in the river like they did Emmett Till. Black Lives Matter ain't did none of that. And so this rhetoric coming out of Donald Trump's mouth is just rhetoric to feed those who believe they are superior, to hate those who they believe who are inferior. And we're onto that game. I hope we're onto that game because we're exposing it now. You know what I mean? And so with that exposure and more people who understands that he's playing the race card, they'll know the next time he come up and get some old rhetoric like that, they'll know, okay, he's playing the race card again. And so I go back to the small percentage of people who listen to him, but that small percentage of people can be dangerous, right? That dangerous, as we see, is spilling over. When we see white folks running up on black folks in their own yard, doing something in their yard, and say, I'm gonna call the police on you, but you don't need to be there. You see? So this stuff is dangerous, and we need to call it out for what it is. And so I'm glad you asked that question. So everybody will see, and everybody will understand what this man is doing is not good for this America.
I'd like to pull up a slide. I'd be interested in knowing your all's opinion on why Black Lives Matter brings up so much controversy.
When I look at that slide, I see, when you look at the top elevation, I think there is a belief system that when a black person affirms that all Black Lives Matter, they're somehow saying Black Lives Matter more than everyone else. And I don't think that was ever the intention. But I think, again, when you are in the predominant culture, you can hijack the conversation, you can twist it to make it seem like it's something that it's not. And then we end up arguing about something that was never intentioned. I think as a black person, I have the ability to say the lives of my people matter. It's no different than when people with disabilities have disability rights and they say our lives matter. When women have women rights, they say women matter. And you've never heard the kind of argument when we say women's rights. You never heard anybody say, well, all rights matter. We were able to say women's rights and we didn't get the pushback. But I think the minute when we start saying Black Lives Matter, people were like, that, well, they have the nerve to say Black Lives Matter, well, all lives matter. We never said all lives didn't matter. We were just making an affirmation about an observation that we were making and that we wanted the world to understand that we had to take a stand at some point. We had to affirm as people of color that we had to say this has to stop. And I think because we're very passionate about this issue, we had to come up with a rallying cry for people, that people could understand that are we paying attention to what's happening? And I think the world is paying attention now to what's happening.
I think it also brought about, that phrase in itself was scary to probably white people, not all, but when you think of, those that may be of an older age or whatever, when Black Power came about, the Black Panthers were there. That was about power. It was a little bit of frightened, scaredness, because it was Black people coming of their own. Say it loud, I'm Black and I'm proud. People were raising up to being who they were, and there was a sense of togetherness. And that could be scary, and I'm sure it was for those who weren't Black. So to see this new day and age of Black Lives Matter, it's deeper than that point at that time, because people now can see what has happened just recently of how those who, the gentleman in all the news issues of us being killed right on tape. And it was like you were less than a person. And we weren't the only ones that saw that. The world saw that and felt that. And then when you reflect back on when we used to be bought, sold, just numerous things in our history that have come about. And we want to let the world know, yes, all lives do matter. Human beings of some type of humility about life feel that anyway. But it's a message to let everyone know, we're tired. Black lives do matter. If you feel that you matter, she matters, he matters, we as a collective people, we matter. And it's deep, and it's deep. And we have to be careful to not let that be washed out with the things that's going on. Because a lot of stuff is happening good, and then a lot of things are going to happen bad, which they are. But we have to stick with making it work. And while other people have come aboard, look at all the country, the world supports life, a living life. So that's why Black Lives Matter is a phrase, and it's scary for a lot. It's scary. It's scary. But it needs to be said. It needs to be done. And we need to keep it in a positive note and let it work the way it should be. Justice-wise, money-wise, economically, all kinds of ways that we live to let Black lives matter. People really get a sense of knowing it matters.
I think one thing that was very frustrating for me is if you follow social media, whenever there's a discussion about Black Lives Matter, you always start to see Black crime statistics. And you'll hear people say, well, if Black Lives Matter, why do you have so much black on black crime? And I remember getting into this debate with a person on social media, which I normally don't do, but I had to, because I said, you know, it's interesting that we all know through research that the likelihood of you killing someone or being killed by someone you know is highly likely, and research will tell you that. And because of segregation, that's why you will have a black person killing a black person. That's a statistic about segregation. That has nothing to do with us not having the value of black lives. And so I want to make sure that people understand when you hear terms like black on black crime, don't advance that. We didn't create those terms, because you don't hear terms like white on white crime. You have white people being killed by white people all the time. And then we take that rhetoric language and we perpetuate it in our own communities. That is a statistic about segregation and nothing more, nothing more.
Michelle touched, I'm sorry. Michelle touched on the thing that I was going to say regarding the crime statistics. I do think that people look at those statistics and then they see the outrage and the marches and so on regarding the crime that a white officer commits against a black citizen and how much outrage that creates. But many, many times more numbers that day or that week occur from black perpetrators and black victims. And they said, well, if Black Lives Matter, maybe those black folks that are offending should be told. The other thing is, I think that since most of the things that are being torn down, whether it be statues or names on buildings or whatever, is of white people, and I know it's not strictly because they're white, but sometimes it could seem that that part of this campaign is to remove the contributions of white people and white faces from the history of the U.S. and replace them with non-white faces and names. And that's how it's perceived, for right or wrong, by, I think, a lot of people. So those are two thoughts I had on it.
And that takes to share in with what he just said, bringing the true history. Those statues that are coming down, when you really know the history of why some of those statues were torn down, is because of the Confederacy, things that happened during that time, the generals or so forth, and people that did some cruel things to people, black people, not just black people, but people, period, and led our country in a crazy way. So unfortunately, the statues that are coming down, yes, they are white men, but I mean, you know, during that time, they dare not have a statue of a black man or a black woman. And that there was a purpose of doing that to show who was superior at that time. And the reality is really coming forth now to know, when you learn your history, it was cruel, and there was reasons why those statues were placed where they were. A superior look up, or, you know, to worship, or to abide by, or history. And all of us have history, but we want the true history to come out, the true history. And maybe I think that once the statues are down, you know, that's a big issue that's about now. It's kind of circumventing around things that really, really need to be happening, but maybe they will be replaced by maybe not even a person. It can be a sign of peace, a sign of love, of unity, of combining everybody together in some certain places, you know, and not just one face over it all. So that's just one thing that's happening now. And it doesn't take away, when you know the real history, knocking a statue down doesn't take away the past. But for young people, it may be a newness that might want to be shared, a realness that needs to be shared. History needs to be told for everybody. That's how I look at it.
Let me say this about those statues, these Confederate folks and this Confederate flag. These people fought against the United States to separate from the United States. When you fight against the United States, you're considered a traitor. And they fought because they wanted to keep the institution of slavery going. These folks weren't no heroes. These folks were traitors. These folks said, we're going to fight you, the United States, and if we lose, then we lose, but we're going down fighting, and they lost. And so when people fly this Confederate flag, those are losers and traitors. They lost. Those statues, them guys there, why you want to put them on a pedestal when they did the most inhuman things to those kidnapped Africans that we call slaves? Some folk call slaves. Those were kidnapped Africans brought to this country and made to work. You see what I'm saying? So I don't believe we should be honoring those folk. And if history be told, and hopefully it is being told now, people understand about those monuments. You know, I knew it all along. I said, why are we honoring these people who fought against the United States? That's traitors, you see? And so when we put it that way, and then you get someone from up north, like Donald Trump from New York, and he says, oh, there are statues. You ain't from the South. Are who? Who you talking about? You from New York. But he sucks people into this nonsense, and people gravitate toward it, and they believe he's right. They don't even look into it. So check it out. Look at that flag. Those people lost. That flag is a symbol of losers. And I'm glad these corporations and some of these sports franchises like NASCAR are saying, no, we won't fly this thing in any of these NASCAR events. You see what I'm saying? We won't do that. That's the right thing to do. Finally, somebody's getting a conscience, and a good conscience.
You know, you have to ask the question, why? If you listen to just this conversation, ask that question, why? Why is it that, you know, why do you need these? Why is that? You know, and it's about that narrative. It's about creating that mindset. That's just like, you know, one of the things that I tell people all the time, it's like, and you know, they bring up these whole conversations regarding the statues. And I'm like, why don't we start at the root? Let's take down the white Jesus that hangs in these churches. Why don't we take that down? You know, why is that? Why was there a need for that in the first place? Why was there a need to bring slavery in? You know, those are the type of questions. You begin to change the narrative. And then it's like, and why is it that you have a segment of society that perpetuates an ideology of superiority? Why is that? And, you know, and it's basically, you know, it's going to come back to one thing, and that's fear. You create this. And the thing of it is this, is that, you know, when somebody controls that narrative, what happens a lot, and you see that a tremendous amount of that, and it's called self-hatred. And that self-hatred gravitates, you know, and it changes people's minds in a sense that, I mean, you know, you begin to hear. That's just like, you know, when I was talking about that phrase, people of color. It's like, you know what? It's like that in itself, how demoralizing that is. You know, it's like when we look at the origins of these terminologies and these words and this narrative, we need to reclaim that narrative, and we need to begin to ask these questions, because you see, the answer is in the question. We have to ask these questions. Why is it necessary for you to perpetuate such an ideology? You know, that's what we need to really begin to look at. And then we talk about, you know, some people have used that term truth. You know, it's like, whose truth? You know, I was raised in Standing Rock, South Dakota, and it was my grandmother who told me there's three kinds of truth. There's your truth, my truth, and the truth. Now, which truth are we going to bring to the table? We can bring them all to the table. But we have to be able, we have to be strong enough mentally, emotionally, and spiritually to deal with that conversation, that narrative. Because even now, if you listen to people these days, the narrative that is being put out there, you know, all we're doing is perpetuating that same conversation. And it's like that conversation has got to change. And we have that ability now to change that conversation. And you see that once this movement started, once Black Lives Matter started, it was changing that narrative. And that's what scared the heck out of them. And that's why you saw such all these divisive tactics being used, because it's now a mental game. They're playing with this up here. And you got to control that. You can control that.
I think one of the things you said about truth is that I think we're seeing, since this movement has become so strong, people are afraid if their truth is not the acceptable truth. They offer an opinion, and then the backlash hits. They're going to lose their sponsors. They're going to lose their opportunities. They're going to maybe lose their job. And so, yeah, they have the freedom of speech, but the repercussions of saying the truth makes them apologize for saying the truth. And please don't hurt me because I said that other thing foolishly, even though that's how I felt. And I think that's part of the problem if you want to have conversations between groups. Everybody has got to be able to say what they really believe without fearing saying what they really believe.
Well, we can always have a discussion and disagree on certain issues, but the disagreement shouldn't lead to me calling the person I disagree with some obscene names or putting that person down and that kind of thing. And so what I'm saying is that we can disagree, you know, but we can disagree and we can have a discussion, but that discussion shouldn't have my disagreement have me put some stereotypes on you that's not warranted. We just disagree. I disagree with a whole bunch of my friends. I got some friends of mine who say they're Donald Trump supporters. That's who you support, that's who you support. I'm interested in what are your actions. Now, are you going to act in the fashion which is being portrayed out there against me? Because if that happens, then we're going to have some problems. And so you can go ahead and support who you want to support, but don't try to convince me to support who you support, and I'm not going to try to convince you to support who I support. And we can have a great time together.
Time to the next question. How does the audience feel about the marches that are taking place across the globe in support of Black Lives Matter?
I think it's amazing that you have all people joining together to discuss the injustices that we've always seen. I mean, when you can see citizens from Bellbrook and Centerville and Oakwood hanging Black Lives Matter signs, or even All Lives Matter signs, that there's this joint humanity that people were just outraged. And I don't know if it's because of COVID-19 and people didn't have the distractions of Little League and AAU ball and shopping, that we were just transfixed for a moment. We were all on one accord, and I don't know if it's by some grand design. I have to believe that it was, that people came together. And so I think when you see global unrest, I think there's going to be lasting change, and I'm excited about it. I hope it's not short-lived, and I think this is different. I think we've seen a lot of marching and we've seen a lot of protests, but I think this is different.
You know, One of the things is this that's happening. There is a tremendous amount of empathy that's taken place. But one of the things also too is this, is that there's compassion. And that's probably the one thing that scares them the most. And when I say they, I'm talking about the system that's in place of, most people look at it as, capitalism. And that's where it's the most threatened at, because humanity suddenly is developing morals. And so we want to go and, one of the things in their defense, they want to go and take this narrative and control the narrative. But in reality, we should be talking, the people need to be talking about compassion. The compassion that we have for one another. Because there's a realization that this can happen to anybody. And it is happening. And I mean, and these questions that are out there. A little over a month ago, I had down at Mimesburg, and there was a rally at the Dayton Mall. But I went over to Mimesburg Mound, and we were up at the mound and everything, and pretty soon there was 4 young adults came. And they came, and one of those young boys, there were students, Centerville High School and Stebbins High School. And one of the students recognized me, and he said, "Can I ask you a question, Mr. Jones?" And I said, "Sure." So we began to talk about what was happening. And he said that, he said, that was wrong. That was wrong. What happened was wrong. The fact that this man died. He said, but it was also wrong that somebody filmed it. And it was wrong that we watched it. All of it was wrong. He said, everything about it was wrong. He said, I wanted to do something. He said, I talked to my parents. And my parents said, this doesn't concern you. He said, but this was wrong. He said, I wanted to do something. So he said, we snuck out. He said, we snuck away. And he said, we went to the rally. He said, and when we got to the rally, he said, what did we see? He said, we saw a bunch of white people trying to feel good about themselves. He said, and we walked away. He said, we came here. He said, and I'm glad that you're here. So we talked about it for a while. You see, because he was feeling a tremendous amount of empathy, and he was feeling compassion. But we as adults, the adults that were there, supposed to be there, were failing him. And that's where we have to look at. We as adults, see, we have that ability to control that narrative, and we have to be able to begin to do that. Because there's a generation that's coming that's realizing what's happening socially and what's happening to humanity. Because they're not finding it. They're not finding it in the schools. They're not finding it in their homes. And he had that question. And because, we talked. And I thanked him for being strong enough to be open and honest about how he felt. And, and I encouraged him. I said, don't ever lose that. Don't ever lose that, because I said, that's what has happened. The big portion of our society in this world, we've lost it. Because so many people these days are talking about right and wrong. What's the truth? We've lost it. The ability to listen to one another and to feel compassion. That's the one thing that we need to move forward with.
Why do you think some of the protest marches have turned violent?
Well, when you have large groups of people, some of those people coming down to these rallies are coming down to start some trouble. And they get lumped in with everybody else, right? And I've read some articles where some groups who had ties to white supremacy, I'm not gonna say their name, I'm not gonna give them that much credit. They were infiltrating these rallies, and they were coming just to start a fire, break out windows, because they knew it'd be attached to the folks in the Black Lives Matter. And when I first heard about some of these groups, I said, see, there lays a problem. And as a matter of fact, I seen a post where a individual dressed in all kind of garb, his face covered just about, he's just breaking out windows of the store. One of the guys recognized him. I think it was in, I forget what state it was. He said, hey, I know you, you're a police officer, right? The guy took off and started running. The guy ran back after him. Hey, man, you're a police officer, what are you doing? And the guy jumped in his car and took off. And so we have to be very careful about when people peacefully protest. Those people are there peacefully protesting, most of them. But you have these people who are coming just to start trouble, so the blame will get on Black Lives Matter, and that's what we have to be careful about. They did this before. I mean, you go back to the Black Panther Party. It was infiltrated by folks, and they went out and tried to do crimes or to be put on the Black Panther Party. They did this in the NAACP. They did it in all these groups. You know what I mean? Even the SCLC, which Dr. King was the president of, they had folks infiltrate that too, and then go back and tell folks who was in power what was going on and try to create crimes and blame it on these people. So this is not anything new. This is just a continuation. But with the video phones, it's hard to get away from it now because we see what's happening, and we can, most of the time, identify the person who started the fire, and we've seen that happen before too. And that's to the good of the good police officers who investigate this thing and find these people who cause this trouble and make their arrest.
On to the next question. There are various symbols of the Confederacy, including statues being taken down. What are your thoughts about these actions?
Well, I know that I think any form of violence, and I understand the anger that people are feeling, but I think when you play into destruction of property, it plays into that narrative that tells me you don't have a plan. I think when you want to peacefully protest, you have to use the systems that are in place to make changes. And I think it gives credence to people saying, look, they're out of control, they have no order, they're disorderly. And I think we had to be very careful about missing and losing the message in acts of violence, in acts of property destruction. There was a real popular Facebook post that was going around, and this young lady kind of defiantly looks into the camera and she says, I don't really care about destroying property because we don't own anything. And I wanted to shake her and say, but we could own something. And that's a dangerous narrative to say because we don't own anything, we don't care that we destroy things. And I don't want our generation to think that you have to destroy things to be able to make progress. I think you have to be able to educate yourself and articulate the systems to make change, to make lasting change. Because if you're just out there burning things, you give people the ability to say, see, they don't have any self-control, they don't have a plan, and there's not going to be that empathy. So I think we started with empathy, but when you start burning and when you start looting and when you start destroying, part of the people that maybe were empathetic are going to go pull back a little bit and say, now, wait a minute, we didn't sign up for that. So I just hope that we're smarter than that and we understand that, yes, there's a lot of empathy, but it'll stop and it'll soon deteriorate if we continue to destroy things.
So what is the objective of the question? That's one of the things that you have to ask yourself, you know. Michelle used the word, educate. And that's one of the things that today, what education are we talking about? There was a point in time when we used to be able to go to school and we were instructed on how to think. And, you know, it's like, what, 15 years ago? 12, 15 years ago, when we began to introduce the test to where we taught a generation, an entire generation, not to think, but to study for the test so that they knew that they had the right answer. So they began to teach the right answer. So what is the right answer? They took away that ability to think. That education is missing. I mean, it's really missing the point. And that's where, when we have to begin to think about it, just think about just even that question, just the question itself. Why that question? You see, because, you know, I can sit back and I could see what's happening, and I understand it to a certain degree, but yet, you know, it's like, is that me? No, that's not me. That's something that, you know, we have to basically, a couple of weeks ago, some of the elders from my reservation had gotten together. And then they called me and they said, Guy, they said, you're out there on the front. They said, we had ceremony and we talked about this word, understand. We don't have that experience. Our experience in our life isn't the same experience that y'all have out there off the reservation. So how can we honestly say that we understand? How is it that people out there really can say that they understand what's happening here on the reservation? You know, when we talk, when we meet strangers, how can we honestly say that we understand? Because we can't. Our experiences are different. But what we can do is accept. And that's one of the things is that when I've seen those actions, I've accepted them. Because I see the origins and the mentality and the environment with which they came. When you look at the foundation of this country, not this land, this country and of this government, it was founded on fear, violence, and capitalism, money, greed. And who was it that brought that here? You have to go back to the very beginning. Those ships who came and landed on these shores, those were criminals. Because the people who sent those ships lived in fear that if they went too far, they would fall off the face of the earth. Because they didn't have a relationship with our Creator, our Maker. So they lived in a constant state of fear. So what they did is they sent out their criminals. When people were talking about looting, I'm like, look at what has been going on since 1492. You know, look at that. Look at that narrative. There's been looting. Look at just what's happening here in the city of Dayton. You know, I mentioned earlier on about Alexanderville, the looting that took place there. I have photos of boxes of artifacts that were taken from Triangle Park and sold to museums in Europe. And the people who benefited from that, what did they do? Well, you know, you see a lot of those names on various communities. You see them all over. You know, that's one of the things is that we have to begin to think. It's a time now where we need to begin to develop a way of knowing and begin to utilize that ability to think.
Colin Kaepernick is still unemployed. Why do you think this is the case?
Well, I can tell you this, all the owners of the NFL franchise teams are all white. And the fact that when Colin Kaepernick got the idea from a veteran of the military who called Colin Kaepernick when he seen him sitting down doing the national anthem, he said, hey, Colin, in the military, we take a knee for our fallen soldiers, right? He said, why don't you take a knee? See, that part people didn't hear. This came from a military veteran to Colin Kaepernick. And the fact that the President of the United States can refer or say that and call these NFL players who peacefully protest SOBs. Let me tell you what that word is. You're saying these people are the sons of a B. So you're calling a mama a B. You see? You can't get much more hatred than that. They didn't care about the protest, that police brutality and systemic justice, racism that Colin Kaepernick was protesting. They didn't want to talk about that. As Guy Jones said, they want to change the narrative, so they changed it to the fact, well, you're disrespecting the flag. Disrespecting the flag? Well, I can tell you, if my heritage, Native American heritage under that flag, they didn't care when they was hanging us from trees. They didn't care when they was beating us from can't see morning to can't see dark about disrespecting the flag. So it ain't about no flag. What Colin Kaepernick was doing was he was highlighting and peacefully protesting the fact that police brutality was running rampant and still is, and systematic racism hadn't got in check either. And so now when the NFL comes out, Roger Goodell said, well, yeah, there is police brutality and we got to do something. Well, you owe Colin Kaepernick an apology because you didn't come to his rescue then. And all these white owners ain't said a mumbling word now. They all quiet. They all quiet when the commissioner, Roger Goodell of the NFL, says Colin Kaepernick was right. So if the man was right, you need to apologize, a public apology, but I don't think that's going to come. And all those owners who talking about we're going to fine the players if they take a knee and all this kind of nonsense, that tell me they're not on board to help eliminate the systemic racism. They want to keep it in play. That's what it tells me. Otherwise, they'll be out there doing more than what they're doing because Colin Kaepernick was right. Now, whether he gets to play in the NFL or not, I doubt it because he's been whiteballed now, not blackballed because ain't no black owners. He's whiteballed. So he's been whiteballed, and as long as he's whiteballed, he's not going to play in the NFL again.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. My personal opinion. I think Colin is unemployed because he wants to be. Not in a negative sense. He can have any kind of job he wants, honestly. I know his career is with NFL and playing football, but if he truly, truly wanted, as we say, unemployment, have a job, he could have some type of job. There is something there for him, and it's coming, and it may not be back on the football field. It may be a part of an owner of a team, which would be a blessing, or an owner, or something bigger than that. But I just think it might not be his time at this point to be out on the field again, but he can truly have a job. Somebody would hire him. I don't think he's solely depending on NFL anymore. It's been a long time coming. He's got a lot of talent. He's a smart man. And he's playing the game just right, I think, because his time is coming where he's going to get what he wants.
I don't have a problem with Colin Kaepernick or anyone kneeling, but he did it only during the playing in the national anthem, which I consider disrespect to the national anthem, the country, the flag. And if he wanted to kneel before, if he wanted to kneel after, for me, it wouldn't be any kind of controversy. But when he or anyone says, well, he wasn't disrespecting the flag or the country, well, why do it during and only during the playing of the national anthem? And I think Roger Goodell is one person who is saying what he has to say, because if he says anything else, it's going to hurt the NFL. It's going to hurt his position as NFL commissioner. And I think that's the only reason why he's saying it. I think the actions of the owners show that they don't want the controversy on their team, and they'll let somebody else make that decision, but they aren't going to.
Let me say this about disrespecting the flag. My great-grandfather fought in World War II, right? He came back here to the States and couldn't even go in a restaurant and get a cup of coffee in uniform. Not only him, but other black soldiers. So when you talk about disrespecting the flag, and when we have black soldiers that fought in every war in this country, and we come back to this country here and get lynched in a uniform of the military, that's the ultimate disrespect. So who is the biggest disrespecter of the flag in the military? That's the question that needs to be asked and answered.
Just one other comment. All that was wrong, but as with all the faults that this country has, we're still, each of us, lucky to be here. There's people around the world that long still to come to the United States and risk their lives to do so, and hardships to do so. And yet we are born here, and often we can't see the opportunities as people born in this country that people born elsewhere and come here see. So I think we shouldn't forget that we have a wonderful country still that we should each be thankful for.
And this country got a lot of work to do, too, to treat people equal. Because in that Declaration of Independence, it says, all men are created equal. But I say all men are not treated equal. And so we need to work on that, the treatment part.
Don't forget that it refers to Native people as merciless Indian savages. Yeah, don't forget that. So that kind of puts an exclamation point on that greatness of America.
And I think we took it a little far. I mean, we have in our lives, the flag is a symbol, it's a token. If it wasn't a flag, it could have been something else. So the true message is not really being said. Had Colin been a white man bending on his knee, what would have been said then? You know, I think it has its place of where it was. And when you think about singing the flag, singing the Star Spangled Banner, when you really listen to the words of them, this is me. I remember being in school and we had to say the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag every day at school, put our hand on our heart. We're pledging to a flag, and I was trying to figure out, why are we doing this? And then when I started really understanding, and even when you get to the end of the words, for liberty and justice for all, and I'm like, what? You know, so as you grow and you learn, and we make things idols, symbols. How about playing football or basketball or whatever, and never singing the pledge or singing Star Spangled Banner or whatever, and just play the game or do something else? So I think it became an issue deeper than what it really should have been. It really was. And now we all know bending of the knee. I know we're here in our church. This is my church. You get on your knees, you're praying to the Lord Jesus Christ. So bending on a knee, we just took it everywhere. And and we know what it was about. We knew what it was about, and it's sad that the situation turned out like it did, but it's going to be corrected in its own way. And he came out showing exactly, he was talking about police brutality. It wasn't nothing about disrespecting no flag. It was police brutality, and we saw it with the knee.
Quaker Oats recently admitted that Aunt Jemima's brand was based on a racial stereotype, and they are now retiring that image. What are your thoughts about Aunt Jemima being retired?
Well, I do know the two individuals who came up with that self-rising flour to make those pancakes, those two individuals tried to market this thing. From the research I've come across, they was having trouble marketing it. And they come across an old minstrel show that had a song in it that says, "Oh, my ain't your mama," some kind of song. And they said, man, that's kind of catchy. Why don't we use it, put that on the title of our self-rising flour? And then they went and got a black woman who was a servant for some rich white folk and put her up there on Front Street and took her around to these fairs to market this stuff. And so the old Aunt Jemima comes from an old minstrel show, and if you don't know what that is, you're going to look it up. That's where white folks put black tar all over their face and danced around like some fools, you know, for entertainment purposes. And so that old Aunt Jemima, you know, Quaker Oats or wherever owns it now, decided to discontinue it. And, hey, to each his own. If that's what it is, then that's what it is. But we should know the history behind it before we make and pass judgment.
I look at it as a gesture, and I would hope that the corporate board of Quaker Oats goes further than just changing an effigy. I would really hope that they would look at their board composition, that they would look at their hiring practices for people of color. I think it's a nice gesture, but it's much deeper than pancakes for me.
There have been gestures made by corporate America to acknowledge that systematic racism exists. What do you think about these gestures?
I think there have been letters of apology written to people that they now are acknowledging systemic racism. And I'm hoping for many of these corporate interests, it goes beyond a PR ploy. It's fashionable now to acknowledge racism, even though we've been acknowledging it for hundreds of years. But I would hope that these corporate interests go further than that in terms of education, in terms of succession plans for people of color, to go back and find out why executive culture wasn't an aspiration or a realistic goal for people of color. I think that gestures are just that. And, you know, there are tons of letters. I think if we do a Google search, we'll find out there are many. But I would like to see 6 months from now, did the corporate culture really change as a result of what we're seeing globally?
I mean, you know, when you talk about systemic racism, what depth are we going to go to? I mean, when I came in, I told you my name. That is an example of systemic racism. My name. Do you know my name? Do you know the history of my name? Where it came from? How I got that name? The system. It's the system that created that. And, you know, and when you look at that history of my name, I am 100, there's nothing else in this body here. I am Honkpapa Lakota. My parents, my grandparents, for generations, For years and years and years, we've been Lakotas. We are the original landowners. This is our land. This land is an occupied country. This is my land. But yet, I carry the name Guy Jones. How did I get that name? It's the system. And what depth are we going to take that when we talk about systemic racism? What depth are we going to go to? Yes, what's happening now, these are really nice gestures. But let's talk about the depth of this. Look at this building we're in. This is part of that system. There's nothing wrong with Christianity. But you got to question some of those Christians. You got to look at it because it's part of that system. Now, how far are we going to go with it? That narrative that has created all of these social ills that exist within today's society. You know, how far are we going to go? Are we really willing to change it so that we no longer hear the cries of our children who are hungry or who are being abused, who are being sold? The women that are being abused and sold on the streets? The sexualization of our women? What depth are we going to go? Our elderly. Look at how we treat the elderly in this country. Look at how they're being treated. Even those with mental illness. How do we treat them? When we look at the LGBTQ community, look at what this society, are we going to address that system? You know, when we think about that and these gestures, and that's all they are right at this moment, they're gestures. Because I think right now, yes, there is a rise in morality, there is some empathy, and there is flashes of compassion. But we need to go beyond these gestures. We need to go beyond those gestures to the point that we begin to make a change for humanity. That change. Dayton is really unique. You know, we talked about the flag, we talked about the statues, we talked about all these things. The symbolism. When you look at the history, not America's history, but the history of the landowners that were here, Dayton has always been special. Why is that? Why was all of those burials at Triangle Park? Because, you see, there's 4 rivers that come here, and those 4 rivers make the one, and that one is the hand. And when you look at indigenous cultures, that hand is a symbol of what? Humanity. Humanus. Look up at what it means. Humanus. It's about humanity. And it's even written in the scriptures, the hand of God. Having a relationship with our Maker and understanding it, because it's right here. It's in the land. It's not coming out of some book. It's written right here in the land for all of us to see. And the native people saw that. And this is where they came to hold ceremony. This is where they came to say goodbye to their relatives and bury them here. This is ceremonial ground. And a lot of people don't recognize it Because a lot of us, who educated us? So those symbols, they're still here. So when we talk about systemic racism, what depth are we willing to go to?
If you were the U.S. president for one day, what would you immediately change to improve the racial climate in the country? I can speak for me. It'd have to be the police. They're the first front line of interaction with the community. I looked up a stat earlier today, and it takes a longer time to get a barber's degree than it does to join the police force. So that'd be the first thing I'd do. It's just somewhat working with the police.
I would change our system of elections, how we elect the President of the United States. I think that's the most pivotal and important position in the United States. And yet you see so much emphasis on the amount of campaign funding that's necessary to be the President of the United States. Millions and millions of dollars to elect a person, and then the popular vote doesn't count, the electoral vote. I would change the Electoral College, and I would eliminate the system that allows good people, that keeps good people from running because they don't have the financial means to do that. That's what I would change.
I would change the part of the educational curriculum as it relates to history. Instead of just teaching just European and Black history, I would bring it all. Asian, Native American, across the spectrum. People will learn what these groups had contributed to society. Because once we understand that, then we look at people in a different light. And so that education piece will be a big one, because people still believe that Christopher Columbus discovered America, and we know that that's a lie. So we have to do some changing there, and so that we include everyone, because this is a melting pot, this America. We got all kind of nationalities in here now, and folks are afraid of what they don't know or understand.
I think my first act would be to propose dividing the United States up into smaller countries, that maybe there would be less divisions. We're an awful big country to be governed by Washington, D.C., and I think it would be better if that each area of the country had its own set of laws and the way they wanted to do things, and they wouldn't have to abide by something that is decided thousands of miles away.
Hard to do, just question in itself to be a president for one day. But I think I would start off, if I was president for just one day or the first day, start off for me and to hope and pray that it would happen for others, a day of prayer and fasting. And we would start organizing, feeding the hungry and getting the homeless, and bring about a more caring attitude about our country, so that we can start growing and doing things that we should be doing as a people for everybody.
This has been episode 3 of the Tabernacle Talks. I would like to thank the 5 panelists for sharing their ideas. And if you're still watching, please like, comment, and share